Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes. I'm Josh,
I'm Mattie.
and today we've got three albums we're going to talk about: Freddie Gibbs' Bandana and Lingua Ignota's Caligula are our brand new releases, and for our kind of older release, we're going to talk about Placebo's self-titled album. Now, before we get started, there's been some controversy with ContraPoints. So first, who is ContraPoints?
Yeah. So if you don't know who Contrapoints is, she is a transgender, I will say, video essay channel. And her video essays are essentially about uh, the big questions in today's society. So her latest video, for example, was a half-hour video essay on what we should do about men, or rather, what men should do about themselves. She's also talked about the trans community at large, the different voices in the trans community, pronouns, feminism, the left, all that kind of thing. With a very open style, in that she will hear and consider both sides of the argument, but without obviously pandering to reactionary ideologies.
In regards to her style, well, I'm a philosophy student, and she is a philosopher. Like, she has a PhD in philosophy, and it's been kind of likened to Platonic dialogues, but maybe even more effective in the sense that they're almost intended to evoke. Well, yeah, it's very dialectic in terms of she presents two stark contrasting points, and there's no real positive argument in her video, but it's meant to like provoke discussion in the audience or lead to more considerate um thoughts on stuff like trans culture, which before her channel there wasn't really anything of this level or platform talking about identity politics this intently.
She's a
And yeah,
huge force of discussion, and like you were talking about, like in one of her most recent videos, the trans trenders video, she has one person that you would view this recurring character called Tiffany Tumbles, who we are supposed to view as gatekeeping and unlikable, but at a certain point in the discussion between her and another character who is trans, that is like Tiffany Tumbles ends up being kind of correct about certain things. So yeah, it's very dialectic in terms of there's no real one correct point of view. So yeah, she's a binary trans woman, and recently the controversy that she's been embroiled with is essentially some people are worried about the way she talks about non-binary people. I believe in some of her videos as well, but mainly it's a reaction to something she said on Twitter, as it always is with this kind of thing. So just to lay out what that was, essentially somebody made a tweet, not ContraPoints, about how being asked pronouns and passing around the pronoun question in spaces uh, can be kind of unpleasant for binary trans people, or just she didn't even really frame it as being about binary trans people in the first place. It was just that she felt like it was the only reason people would pass around the pronoun question was because she, as a trans woman, was there, and it kind of felt like this weird over focusing on it, essentially. And ContraPoints essentially um, retweeted this, and she was like, "Yeah, I've had a similar experience in hyperwork spaces. Like, but it can kind of feel targeted and just kind of um, because she hasn't she feels ContraPoints feels like she hasn't been able to pass as a woman for very long, so it feels like kind of just an acknowledgement that she's being clocked when she's asked her pronouns, which as a I'm a trans woman. I've spoken about that before, and if I had believed myself to be passing and I felt like I was being asked my pronouns because they noticed I wasn't a cis woman, and that I was a trans woman, that would be a moment of discomfort for me. Like, I relate very much to um, ContraPoints in that situation. yes, they're doing a nice thing by double checking your pronouns, but it kind of feels like that the only reason they've had that thought about asking your pronouns is the fact that they've clocked you, which is would induce gender dysphoria if that's something you experience, or just make you uncomfortable. So I definitely relate to that. The issue that has offended some people, especially non-binary people, as this is what it's to do with, is that she said it like in the same thread. I guess this is a good thing for like gender neutral and non-binary people because obviously those are identities that can, if you're not a binary person, there's a lot more fluidity of presentation. I do say that though as a very male presenting trans woman, so obviously there are very different representation of binary identities. But yeah, so that is essentially where this problem has come in. And since ContraPoints has, you can still go on her Twitter. I don't really know how it works, but her Twitter's kind of deactivated. It's not really active, um, and it's because of there's been some fairly intense backlash and then backlash to the backlash, and it's just gotten a bit kind of out of hand. Like when you search ContraPoints now, the suggested search terms are ContraPoints cancelled and ContraPoints screenshots. Like it's kind of a mess.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very fair assessment of what happened. Well, just a clear announcement of what happened. To give like, my 2 cents, well, first of all, I'd like to say that obviously this is a sensitive issue. However, despite it being sensitive, I do think okay, open discussions about how we are to move around in a world which now we all have a responsibility to be aware about, gender inclusivity and things like that. There's no excuse now. It's such a visible issue, It's everywhere. So maybe in the 80s, obviously there were trans people in the 80s. You can imagine a kid in the 80s growing up, it's less visible, it's not always on the news. Maybe they don't have to think about it as much. But now everyone has a responsibility. We've passed a threshold. And I think that like personally, I feel that people who argue, well, if you're cis or if you are a binary trans person, you shouldn't talk or think about these issues. That's going to lead us to a point where no one meaningfully engages with how to create a comfortable environment for everyone or a sensitive environment. And
Mm.
I personally, I think that that would be quite damaging and not lead to much progress. So I'm a cis black person, and one point of view I could bring to this is the issue of being a minority and how the majority treats you. So what Contra said, it really resonated with me because personally, like the film Get Out, for example, it's really uncomfortable when, as a minority, you experience a majority that, in quite a self-congratulatory way, wants to make you feel
Mm.
comfortable. To me, like the black experience equivalent to a bunch of cis people getting in a circle announcing their genders, and you're the only one who has a gender that wouldn't be conventional.
Yeah.
Is the equivalent to like a bunch of white people when they meet me being like, when they're talking to their other white friends, it's like very normal conversation, just whatever comes up. And then when I come in, it's like, oh, let's talk about Black Lives Matter and hip hop and like how much I think it's wrong to say the N word. And it's like, okay, I get it, you're not a Nazi, but currently you're not. I don't really feel like you're viewing me as a person. I feel like I'm some sort of like freak show, and you're trying to be tender with me and make me feel comfortable. It's very pandering and condescending.
You're being viewed through the lens of what makes you different.
Exactly. Now, what makes this specific situation Contras in so interesting and complicated, in my opinion, is the kind of it's not completely brand new. We had this issue with more kind of gay visibility, in the 60s and onwards. But this issue of like invisible minorities and how we're supposed to treat or act around them. So as a black person, I'm immediately clocked, quote unquote, as black, right? So I'm gonna get into that situation a lot. And it's very easy to avoid because you can just acknowledge that I'm black by seeing me and not treat me differently. But as a trans person, it's I'd argue like impossible to
It's
affirmatively
muddy.
completely quote unquote determine someone's gender based on like on site. So like how you respond to that is slightly like more muddy. And two things I like to say. First of all, I think it's really harmful to and honestly, as like a leftist, I think it's embarrassing to turn this into like a thing of cancellation, because it means like it makes the leftist community look like kind of a bit completely unsympathetic of a trans woman who's come up and said, this makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's like, no, you're shut down, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we need to talk about like how we're going to handle this as a society. And we need to decide, okay, well, should we constantly ask everyone we meet what their gender is, or should we only ask people who look unconventional? If we always ask people who look unconventional, then it still asserts this kind of, there is a normal gender and then there is other people outside of it, and we're going to treat them a bit different. Or should it kind of just be like a thing that comes up naturally in conversation? It's extremely difficult. I personally don't have the answer to that, but I think it's a discussion worth having.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's kind of two things I want to say. In response to what you said, like, as a male presenting trans woman, it's really hard. It's kind of shows how complicated an issue it is in that I am exactly kind of like, as well as non-binary people who like, which yeah, is a more kind of can have more fluid presentations. I mean, kind of exactly the kind of person that like you would want to ask their pronouns, or that like you need to ask the pronouns to ascertain their gender. But at the same time, like I really relate to Contra, not in passing, but in terms of how it would make me feel like, I don't know, it would make me feel like the other. And I think it's kind of a product of the fact that this is all very new. Kind of asking what people what their pronouns are and things like that. Like this is, trans people have been around for centuries, but in terms of like publicly like being aware such a short amount of time, there really just isn't like a standard of how to do it. And like when people do misgender me, like when they get my pronouns wrong, like unknowingly, it obviously I'm not upset with them. That would be ridiculous. I don't think any trans person is upset with anyone when they unintentionally misgender them, without knowing. That is, um, but it does, make me not feel great. It's a really hard balancing act. But kind of the thing I want to touch on is that Contra did like a follow up tweet after kind of people responded and was kind of like, I said this was a good thing, and she kind of reaffirmed that this was a good thing. It was more just that it was she was like she kind of ended the tweet with "Can't a tran just vent on Twitter?" And ContraPoint, yeah, she like it makes you laugh. It's like this ContraPoint has this amazing way of communicating through sarcasm, and like while it is sarcastic, it's true. Like I kind of do feel like she should be able to express that discomfort, because she did in that same tweet, like the same tweet, say that this is a good thing for gender. That's actually the only time she brought up non-binary people in that discussion, and it was in reference to the fact that people being asked their pronouns was a good thing for non-binary people. It She was kind of sort of just expressing that a harmful byproduct of that is that as a trans woman she can feel a little bit like targeted, um, which like is something I can understand. And I kind of feel like I'm not so much talking about cancellation here, but I do kind of feel like there's not a huge amount of understanding of kind of the dialectic nature of emotional expression. Yes, it's probably not 100% the best thing in the world that something that is good makes someone uncomfortable, but we're all human beings. I don't feel like ContraPoints is being viewed as a person making an emotional statement here. I feel like people are kind of taking the emotional statement she's making and kind of checking it against a box of like, this doesn't sound good, I don't like it. And that's quite, I don't know. I don't quite know if that's exactly what I believe.
I think there's something really dehumanizing in that. It reminds me of when Tyler the Creator came out as LGBT, yeah, bisexual, gay, whatever you want to call him.
Mm.
Um, and he got lots of like criticism from the LGBT community, basically saying you're not being gay properly, you're not
There
representing
was
us
a lot of
properly.
like think pieces, most notoriously the one that was like, how do we reckon with him?
Yeah, and I again, and this conscious situation reminds me of that. Of yes, we need kind of consciousness and awareness of these issues, but we do still need to let people just be people and acknowledge that there is just an awkwardness to being alive, and expressing this awkwardness isn't always a political affront. It's just like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of an absurd situation where you're the only trans person in a room full of like woke cis people. It's both, it can be both humorous and also cathartic to vent about that weird awkwardness in those moments. And that's not necessarily to be read as like a stringent political treatise. It's just a person being a person expressing how they feel. There's no like maliciousness behind what Contra said, I don't feel. And even if politically you end up not agreeing, don't dehumanize her like that.
I would totally agree. Because yeah, it feels like because she has a platform and it's on Twitter, it's kind of like her like thesis statement instead of like just an expression of something that makes her emotionally uncomfortable. It's like, no, this is kind of contra giving her point of view on people asking about pronouns. This is like she's thought about this, she's considered all possible angles, and this is her final say on the matter. And it's kind of like, no, she just very obviously like saw a tweet that she related to, retweeted it, and just commented on her experience with it. I don't think it's a statement on this thing in general. I haven't actually seen her pronouns video yet, but I just think having like she's being unfairly treated as the kind of speaker for certain issues because she is one of the largest people on the left making these kind of comments.
Mm.
Um,
Why are we throwing like one of the most positive internet personas under the bus? Like,
yeah, yeah, and I do want to be careful because there's kind of like I remember when I went onto the Twitter like kind of like discussion for this, there were some people being like, "Why is ContraPoints being cancelled for this?" Da, 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 da. And then kind of the only actual other side that I saw were kind of people just kind of saying, um, "We're not canceling her. We're just like criticizing her." And like I do get that. Like I mean I think yeah, it's totally fine to criticize like people. I specifically like ContraPoints has tweeted some stuff about gender performance theory that I saw like very recently that I do disagree with, but she's since kind of taken back. If you watch her transgender video, it's very obvious her stance on gender performance theory now. But like yeah, I do think it's absolutely fine to criticize public figures. That is like not what I'm saying, but it's kind of worrying to me that the part that concerns me is that I do feel like this was very obviously just an emotional expression that has kind of gotten out of hand. And again, if you like, if there's anyone that hears this and disagrees, I absolutely welcome a discussion because I would genuinely like to hear what it is about those original tweets that is kind of so powerful and like has created such a discourse because personally and obviously I am saying this as a trans woman, not a non-binary person, so take this with a grain of salt. When I see those original tweets, I do find it difficult to see what the offense caused would be, but that's kind of the reason why I would like to be told. And to be honest, up until this point, I haven't heard a point of view on those on what she said that makes me think she genuinely views the asking of pronouns as to it's so it's to me like even kind of saying it just sounds so what would ContraPoints be saying that's so harmful is essentially what I'm asking. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of our defend contra segment of the video. Yeah, again, like Matty said, you know, if you're non-binary or any gender really, send us some. You know, we have an Instagram account. You can comment. Yeah, contribute to the discussion. I'd like this to be a dialogue. It's not about silencing people. It's about coming to kind of a conclusion mutually, right? So yeah. Shall we move on to the music discussion?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, first up, we have Freddie Gibbs Bandana, co-produced by Madlib. So really, this is a collab album, and more or less a sequel to their last collab album, Pinata. This isn't the first time we've talked about Freddie Gibbs on the show. If you remember, he was on the Injury Reserve album,
Wax on.
Wax On. Yeah, a decent song for that album. And yeah, what's your history with Freddie Gibbs and
Uh,
Madlib even?
it my history with Freddie Gibbs begins and ends with Wax On. And to talk about that, like I think his verse is the highlight of that song. I really like his verse, just the way his voice sounds. I know it's kind of produced, so it's not exactly like just his raw voice, but that kind of throaty sound he has, I just think it's awesome. It just sounds great. It's like almost melodic, but he's again just kind of speaking. Um, but yeah, so I just love that verse. And when I didn't kind of connect the dots that like that was the same Freddie Gibbs that was on that song as in this album, and then it began, and I was like, oh shit, it's this dude. That's cool. So that was really nice. Madlib, I do finally have a history with. Like I'm very very familiar with like the classic hip hop album Mad Villainy. I don't think there's many people who aren't. And he's not really behind the scenes. Like he's one of those producers that gets credited, not just a producer, but as a sort of songwriter almost. But I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that I've heard that he's been involved with in some way that I just haven't been aware of. But yeah, Mad Villainy is obviously a classic album. There's basically nothing I can say at this point that will like contribute to the conversation about that album because it's enshrined now as like one of the like it very much defined an era of hip hop. He's what's the word? Very established, you might say.
Awesome, yeah. I agree, and also on Madlib, very versatile. Like Quasimodo is his rap persona, and that's also excellent. I don't. Have you heard of Quasimodo album?
No, I legit didn't know he had a rap persona.
Some of the most highly acclaimed rap albums of the early 2000s. Basically, he didn't like his voice, so we like pitched it up. So all of the songs, and there's actually a Quasimodo feature on America's Most Blunted. You know the voice that's like pitch up.
Yeah.
That's Quasimodo, which is just Madlib with a pitched up voice. And yeah, it's
That's
really
so funny.
cartoony, really sick. I definitely inspired people like Tyler the Creator. And Freddie Gibbs, this is a rapper I personally struggle with. I have heard Pinata, and full disclosure, I enjoyed Pinata more than Bandana.
Mm.
And Pinata's got some amazing production. I think that's definitely one of the best produced Madlib albums I've heard, and there are some amazing, memorable songs on that album, such as "High" featuring Danny Brown, which is fantastic, and my favorite song, which is "The Walk of Shame," which is a wonderfully soulful, great like pimp, I don't know, drug dealer anthem, I guess, if you're into that kind of thing. Uh, and it sounds like straight out of a blaxploitation film or something. It's fantastic. And here with this new Bandana album, it was getting lots of buzz and I was a bit hesitant to listen to it because it felt kind of like a retread of what we did on
Pinata.
that first Pinata album, exactly. Which is why, like, one of the reasons I'm kind of happy there's no like Mad Villainy 2 is like Mad Villain's so special because it's just like that one spontaneous moment.
Hmm.
And I found this album quite disappointing, frankly.
Oh.
I think for me, my biggest gripes with this album are it's really bizarre because when it's on, it's like fine. And there are songs where I'm like, yeah, I enjoy this. This is like very well produced, well, good rapping. There's nothing egregious about this album. It's just like aggressively fine for me. I think like and it's one of those things where, like, okay, a mediocre Madlib track is still better than most hip hop songs,
Mm,
but
mm.
it's still a mediocre Madlib track. And I will be honest, I do review albums on like a bell curve. I judge them based on like what I think the artist is capable of or what they're trying to do. And I think a lot of these beats are just very run of the mill Madlib beats. They sound pleasant, but none of them really, very few of them really stop me in my tracks. And same with Freddie Gibbs. I'll be honest. What you love about his voice, I don't really love that much. I think he's often compared to MF Doom, obviously because of the Madlib connection, and he's been very aggressive about how he's like, I'm better than MF Doom. I'm my own rapper. Stop comparing me to MF Doom. But you know what? MF Doom does the gravelly monotone rap thing as well, and I think it sounds a lot more fun and better with MF Doom. I think with Freddie Gibbs, it gets a bit too bland for me at points. I can see the appeal; it is distinct and like deep, and I can see why someone would like it. But it's not for me, and it makes me like fall asleep. I really dislike his rapping style, and the best songs on this album are the ones where he switched it up. How did you feel?
So, like obviously this is a hugely acclaimed album. I haven't. I mean, no one comes at an album like as it being critically acclaimed, but I really just thought this looked like a fun, like hip hop produced by one of the like classic all-time producers and someone I liked to verse from. So I just kind of went into it looking for like a pretty solid album and like a pretty solid listen. And I would say like I definitely got that. I definitely like really enjoy my time with this album. But yeah, I kind of feel like the conversation around this is quite inevitably hyperbolic because there's so many people that are like, this is a classic, this is like greatest of the year, that kind of thing. And I wouldn't feel I don't feel nearly that strongly about this album, but I'm also quite far from like your take on it. Because I feel like having not heard Pinata, and having coming into Freddie Gibbs like pretty freshly, I'm still quite enamored with his vocal style. I think comparisons to MF Doom are very like lyrical. Like I really like the way his voice sounds, but I don't think he comes close to like MF in terms of like lyrical flow and like witticism and kind of all the stuff that makes MF Doom. Like I mean obviously his voice is like MF Doom's voice is pretty unique to him. That's kind of what a large part of what he's known for. But the most interesting things, the actual stuff that makes MF Doom's music so much interesting, is stuff that Freddie Gibbs doesn't really compare to with MF Doom. I'd say like my enjoyment of this album is it's very like relaxed. There's like so after you have kind of the intro, like obrigado and freestyle shit, that which does feel very like kind of like opening moments of the album. I kind of enter this like meditative trance where like Freddie Gibbs' voice is just it. I know what you mean. He really doesn't change it up very much. But what that kind of does for me is it kind of I just find the album really relaxing and like fun. I like there's enough emotional like discussion here that I never find it just shallow. But it still to me is just a largely kind of soft, easy experience. I really like it for that. It's it sounds really harsh to call it like really, really good background music, but like it's it's like it's like an ambient hip hop album almost because it's just so good to just like have, and I'm not paying a huge amount of attention to it. But what I'm hearing I do really enjoy.
Like
That's kind of
it's really weird because I feel like I agree with you. I'm just not. I'm less willing to praise that. Like this album is insanely smooth, and there are like when I look at
yeah,
the track
smooth
list,
as
there
the
are some
word.
hooks that are great, like the half man, half cocaine. That's a great hook. Crime Pays is an amazing hook. So does Goddamn. That's some really nice smooth moments. I just
Kind of staccato as well,
yeah.
like the way he kind of riffs on it is really fun.
Totally. It's just I think my personal taste in kind of these kind of like these this kind of rapper persona of like big drug dealer kind of mafioso gangster kind of vibe.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
personally prefer it with a bit more centricity. Pusha T has a verse on this album, and in many ways Pusha T reminds me of Freddie Gibbs. They're very consistent in themes. They normally talk about selling things like cocaine, but I love Pusha T. Like, I love how Pusha T, when Pusha T comes in, he just brings so much energy. There's this kind of like weird manic quality to Pusha T, but also this like assured,
His voice is
almost
very
narcissism.
sharp. His voice is
Yeah,
very sharp.
and
Yeah.
I kind of wish Gibbs brought more of that on it. In all fairness, there are tracks where he has really cool vocal switch ups, such as stuff like, yeah, like Crime Pays, situations.
Also,
Uh,
Cataracts is amazing. Like,
Cataracts is pretty good. Cataracts is great. I completely agree. I guess I just wish there was more of that. Anyway, what were your three favorite tracks, and like, what did you like about them? And
so
what your favorite track, and would you recommend?
So, least favorite track is still quite hard for me. But I think in terms of like my actual, I'll start with least favorite. I'm actually gonna go with the closer. I thought it was incredibly underwhelming. It's weird. Like it just doesn't. It, it doesn't. It's nowhere near as good as the other songs on the album. Like in terms of smoothness, which is what I do love about the album. So there's that. So it's disappointing in terms of just being a good song from this album. But even if it was on that level of quality, that still wouldn't feel like a closer kind of thing. But it doesn't feel like a closer anyway. And then there's just this kind of like weird, like lo-fi outro, and the album just kind of ends. And I was just like, oh, okay, that's odd. Like I wasn't expecting, I don't know, like rap music from fucking like that closer from Killer Mike's like 2008 album, which is amazing. But I wanted an ending. I wanted quality. I don't know. I really don't like that song. It's not that bad, but it just left a really sour taste in my mouth. And like you know what they say, the audience only remembers the beginning and the end. But in terms of three favorites, I really like Cataracts. It's just like so loud and well, not loud, so vibrant and energetic, but also it does retain that like kind of smooth, easygoing feeling. It just feels like, I don't know. It just puts me in a really nice space. I just really like that song. Um, I really like the Anderson .Paak song as well. I have to say, like, there's like ten, like the last half of the album, apart from the closer, is kind of great for me. Like Giannis, I love that song. I think like Anderson .Paak is a great feature for this album. Obviously, people like Pusha T can inject like quite a lot of energy into this more laid back sound, but Anderson .Paak complements what they're going for really well, I think. Um, and I love Crime Pays. I love Crime Pays. Oh my god. I just yeah, coming towards like the first half of the album, it was like such a good introduction into this like sound that they were going for that I do really really enjoy. Um, I just want to there's like one last detail I want to say about the song before I forget, and it's that I quite like the song Palmolive. That's the one with Pusha T on. But Killer Mike has a feature on it in the hook, and I have to say, like, I was really underwhelmed by it. Um, I think it's like the hook is like clumsy as fuck. There's no flow. It doesn't really like rhyme all that well. I kind of have no idea what he's going for. Killer Mike just really doesn't sound good on Madlib beats, I think.
He's
Uh,
got kind of that lame line. I mean, low like no money, and it's like,
yeah,
okay,
it really doesn't work. Like it like I cuz because I kind of just remember the hook from that song like when I'm thinking about it, but then I'm like, what's that song? And it has Pusha T on, and it's really good. And I'm like, oh, it's Palmolive. But then I'm like, oh, but Palmolive's the one with that like awful Killer Mike feature on. And I get yeah, so it's just really weird because the rest of that song is great, and I don't really know what they were thinking because Killer Mike on that song specifically, not just this album, like he could have fit somewhere else on this album better. Killer Mike specifically sounds bad on that song. I don't really understand. So yeah, those are my thoughts on like more specific songs on from the album. And yeah, I'll let you do yours before I do my closing thoughts.
all right. My least favorite track, since I guess we're starting with least favorites now, is is Massage Seats. Uh, But nothing on this album is outright bad. I guess the reason I chose Massage Seats as the least favorite track is, it has a competent beat, but yeah, again, it does feel very run of the mill for Madlib. It kind of reminds me of something off of maybe Pusha T and Kanye West's Daytona or Jay-Z's 444. Like it's very derivative, I feel. Like it's fine, it's competent, but it
Mm.
doesn't really bring anything new. I just don't think Gibbs is charismatic enough to really make this pop. Like I don't really remember many lines he dropped in this album, not many one-liners. Everything's just fine for me again. And with my favorite tracks, they're the tracks that deviated from the norm and normally went into more funky, soulful directions. Stuff like Situations, Cataracts, Crime Pays. These are really cool tracks, and like
Mm.
I've put them on like my playlist that I listen to, and I'm around the house, and I listen to them every now and then, and it's pretty good tracks in their own, and I enjoy them. Uh, but overall, I don't think this album left a massive impression for me, and I don't think like we should go all Elmo explosion meme whenever anyone releases a competent hip hop album. I still,
Yeah.
but again, I don't want to take anything away from people who do really love this. But I guess maybe having listened to hip hop like this for like maybe up to 5 years now, I'm kind of not over it, but it takes a bit more to catch my attention.
No, I very much see what you mean about like the Elmo explosion. Like it it really just kind of felt like the hyperbolic reaction to this does just kind of feel like, oh man, it's really established people in hip hop who have put out some pretty great stuff in the past are making another album. Oh my god, like I get quite sick of that. I
Yeah,
like especially with people like MF Doom, right? Like I mean, like you cannot like deny like MF Doom's impact, but just like it's it gets old. It gets
yeah.
really old.
And with my final thoughts on this album, this is probably the highest quality not recommend I'm ever gonna give. Like you will probably listen to this album and decide it's quite good. But I can't really say there's anything about this album that's especially interesting that makes me want to recommend it. So I'm giving this possibly the weakest of not recommends. It's fine, but I don't really think it's necessarily if you're like a crazy hip hop head and I don't think it's super gonna add much to your collection other than some funky songs. How about you?
Yeah, it's kind of similar. I will recommend this quite strongly. Like I guess if you're pushed for time, don't like push this like right to the forefront of your listening schedule. I would say, because I mean I was gonna do that for this album anyway because everyone was like it's amazing and like I kind of love this. Like I really like the way it feels when it's on, but I kind of don't have a whole lot to take away from it. I just think it's like a really consistently enjoyable project, which is great. Like that's really cool to have that around. Uh, but yeah, so I would recommend this.
All right, awesome. And that was Freddie Gibbs' Bandana. Now, moving on to our next brand new released album, we have Lingua Ignota's Caligula. Now this is her second album, and it's actually my first Lingua Ignota album. I actually listened to it because I just thought the cover art was really nice. Uh,
Oh, it's fucking
I
amazing.
really love the white and pink gold chain thing. Uh, and as a bit of a classics fan, I like the Caligula reference.
Mm,
Her last album is called All B Words Die, with her looking very disheveled, to say the least, on the cover.
mm.
So I knew this was going to be like an intense kind of listen. And before we like unpack it, do you have any history with Caligula or sorry, Lingua Ignota rather? Or like, did you research much about it or read up on it much? Like,
Um,
what did you glean?
So I had heard about it from one of I think it was one of Anthony Fantano's like great albums videos like that he puts out sometimes. There's really just a like pretty solid place to pick up some albums if you're looking for some. Um, and he essentially just described it as like it's something like it's an experience, so I kind of like had a strong idea of what to expect when I went into this, and you kind of can't avoid an expectation when you click on the track list and and every song is all caps featuring such classics as May Failure Be Your Noose, Fragrant is my flowered crown, and my personal favorite, Spite alone holds me aloft. So not in terms of quality, just names we're talking about right now.
Yeah, there are some
So
amazing track titles here for sure.
yeah, yeah, like opinion on music aside, like it's pretty impressive, I would say. So yeah, I had an idea of what to expect.
I guess right off the bat, I gotta say, unless JPEG Mafia at the end of the year comes out with just like an album as good as that Jesus Forgive Me, I Am a Thought single was, which I think it
Hmm.
could. We've also got a Danny Brown album coming out. We just got the album up for it. But so far, Caligula is my favorite album of the year. I think it's completely majestic and beautiful, as well as horrifying.
That's
Uh,
patrician as fuck, dude.
and as a movie fan, and I know you're a big fan of Midsummer, I
I
genuinely
yeah, I was
I
gonna bring that up too. Yeah, sorry.
well, happy you agree. I liked Midsummer, but personally, emotionally, this to me was my Midsummer. I feel like this was the musical equivalent to Midsummer in terms of a sort of with its Baroque production and like neoclassical production. There's kind of a fanciful a fantasy vibe of this album.
Mm,
Uh, I the kind of imagery I got from like the first track, I imagined like sailing down River Styx into the underworld to like exact your revenge and like this kind of dark epic fantasy tale. Uh, and it felt like a kind of taking a someone coming out of a abusive relationship, which in Midsummer was emotional abuse. For Lingua Ignota, it was physical abuse
mm,
and emotional abuse, and taking those emotions and putting it into a high concept sort of fantasy kind of
mm,
atmosphere. I felt like it's comparable to Midsummer in that sense, and that's really what I love about this album so much. I love how grandiose it is and unrelenting it is in confronting these emotions and feelings directly. And I think I have issues with it. I think the second half gets a little bit repetitive. She has a thing where she will kind of write mantras and just drone them for a few minutes, kind of similar to a group like Swans. And I think for the first half, there was like really effective moments of this. But in songs like Sorrow, 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 it did get a bit tired. Uh, and I wish tracks like that were cut down a bit.
mm.
But other than that, I think this is astonishing accomplishment of an album. It's transporting, and even if you've never been through these kind of really stark experiences, just as an artistic accomplishment, this is like, in terms of scope, this is awe-inspiring. How did you feel about the album?
Yeah. Okay. So I I think this is pretty spectacular. So not intentionally, I would say, but a lot of the music that I listen to doesn't make me feel outwardly negative. And I don't think music should just be something that makes you feel good in term or even just like even make you just feel sad, just make you that kind of thing. I think like music can be whatever. Music just has to be an experience, is all. And an experience is definitely the way to describe this album. I don't know if art has ever made me feel this way. Um, and like this, I I don't know if I can put this on my end of albums years list, but if I had to put this like somewhere, like I would. It sucks that this just hasn't gotten that much recognition because I would say this is one of the most incredible achievements of like the century so far. I really think this is just inspiringly powerful. Like there's such pain and anger and torturement here, but underneath it all, and underneath this like neutral expression that you see on her face in the album cover, there's such pain here. There's such pain here, and you don't come to understand that through lyrics. You come to understand that from musical movements and progression, and it's gorgeous. Like how you just really like this album tortures you, in the same way that like Lingua Ignota was tortured, and by the end of it, you just come to understand her pain. Really, like we can kind of like we could sit around and like kind of joke about how like horrifying this album is and how like when I had it on I was legitimately horrified and like tortured, which is funny, but really like what I came away from it all was yeah this like midsummerian sense of pain and anguish and also release, which is astonishing. And that's it's kind of it crosses into like the way I discuss horror films in that the horror is used to achieve like something more than that. It's used to achieve like a story essentially, and it leaves me with an understanding of this artist, that many albums fail to achieve. I'd also just like to say that like these song titles are incredibly dramatic. Like if this were a lesser album, these song titles would be like, whoa, Gizmo going off right now.
Gizmo really is a big fan of the Ignota, uh, unknown to many.
um, what was I saying? Like for me, something like Billie Eilish's album this year, where it was similar, like song titles in all caps, and these like song titles that like could be considered cringy. Like if those songs had been pulled off for me, like things like All Good Girls Go to Hell, if she had like pulled that off, I wouldn't find that song title cringy. It's like about the music that accompanies it. Like and the same here, like song titles like Do You Doubt Me Traitor? Like from someone else, if the music that came from that song title itself was like underwhelming, that song title would feel like disingenuous for me. But the kind of like it's kind of a testament to what like Lingua Ignota is able to achieve, in that she's able to take these like incredibly dramatic song titles and kind of achieve what they impress upon you. Like Butcher of the World sounds like a song like that should be called Butcher of the World and then some. It is torturous and shocking, and I think that's kind of an accomplishment in itself. Excuse me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. This is an album that lives up to its grandiose titles and grandiose cover art and grandiose name. And yeah, if these songs were in lowercase, it just wouldn't feel right.
Yeah,
I'm gonna move into like my favorite tracks, and I'll talk about what made them my favorite tracks and how they kind of built this album up to be so great in my eyes. Um, I'm gonna let give them out. Give me a sec. Okay, I'm back.
cool.
I really loved your comparison to this with horror because I was thinking this was like the best horror film I've seen all year. Because there's such a cinematic quality to this album, and and it very much. I know some people hate the term elevated horror. I think it's a useful term sometimes. It very much reminds me of that technique of using horror to speak on something transcendental to horror. Or sorry, that's wrong. Using horror to speak on issues outside of just I want to scare you. It's like I want you to feel something that will give you a better viewpoint of what it feels like to live in a certain situation.
Yeah, like the ending of Midsummer is exactly like yeah what Midsummer does basically.
Mm. I this album, its most horrifying points are things that tell you it accomplishes this amazing task of reframing how we think of femininity, as well as its comments on like gender politics and surviving on abuse. So some of my favorite, my three favorite songs on this album are "Fragrant Is My Flowered Crown," "If the Poison Won't Kill You,
Mm.
Then My Dogs Will," and "Faithful Servant of a Friend of Christ." And in Fragrant Is My Flowered Crown, I think this is the most clear example of reframing how we think of femininity. There's a vulnerability in moments such as "What would you say of the bond we had?" And this even shows up in earlier tracks, such as lines such as on Do You Doubt Me, Traitor? Remember How I Loved You, and I Don't Eat, I Don't Sleep. And yeah, it's immediately contrasted with the vicious line from Fragrant Is My Flowered. Um, the bitter blood of my many foes sustains me, and heavy is my hammer swinging round, and soft are their throats, and soft are their skulls, and fragrant is my flowered crown. I mean, that's honestly the best. I'm like grinning ear from ear reading that because that's the best lyric I've seen all year,
Mm.
and the immediate and vivid contrast of like soft skulls with like flowers. It's such a genius reframing of how we think of femininity and like feminine power in this relationship that was obviously like an abusive man on a woman, and stuff of like reclaiming gendered power roles, such as her screaming "I'm the C word killer" on "Do You Doubt Me" the trailer. There's a real sort of reclaiming of power on this album, which is amazing because I think like the horror in this isn't just for shock value; it's to make this really strong, powerful, I'd argue, feminist political statement about power in gender and feeling empowered in your gender. And I think there is a fantasy element to this album. I don't think she's literally telling you to like kill people, uh, but I think she's using kind of
It's the emotional hyperbole of it.
yeah, it almost my in my head this album's like about like a death cult and like Lingua Ignota is the leader and the song that like makes me feel this way is If the Poison Won't Take You, My Dogs Will. Which it almost like a John Wayne Gacy Jr. fashion for you Sufjan Stevens fans. Feels like this decade's um empathy for a serial killer song. I don't know if you read about this, but the song's actually about um the serial killer Aileen Wuornos, who suffered like lots of abuse in her life and eventually went on to like murder. I don't know exactly who she murdered, but this song is like Lingua Ignota extending her hand to that woman and like being sympathetic and there's this like real death cult vibe. I'll read out another line because again I think this album's so gorgeously written. Just a few lines from the song. So will you join me? Will you join me? If you lay down your life, no man can take it. Abandon your body so no man can break it. Life is cruel and time heals nothing, and everyone you love will leave you, but not me. Humble yourself. If the poison won't take you, my dogs will unburden yourself. And it's this really unhinged, almost like suicide pact, or maybe like murder pact of like yeah, this heightened emotion and imagery of like reclaiming power and in with through horror like elements, and I get how that would be like controversial or maybe read as like a negative way of reconceptualizing femininity. uh but personally I found it incredibly provocative and engaging, and also these are, in my opinion, as like a fan of like industrial rock, these are super fun songs. Like her screaming Kyrie Elson in "If the Poison Won't Kill Me," uh, is one of the most glorious like industrial moments of the year. Like that is like such a driving conclusion to that track, and fun in the sense of like thrilling to listen to. Like these are really exciting. Only in the second half, I feel like the tracks start to meander a bit, but like man, there are so many songs on here where they just super compelling. My least favorite track is probably going to be Sorrow, Sorrow, Sorrow. Uh, just because I felt like that was one of the most meandering kind of dull tracks. But I really do want to emphasize how astonishing of an accomplishment I feel this album is.
Amazing. So the first favorite track that I'll talk about is "Do You Doubt Me, Traitor." If I'm gonna carry on comparing this to Midsummer, I do think this obviously stands alone as its amazing work of art. This is the cliff scene from Midsummer for me. It is what established this as truly shocking, haunting, and terrifying. But also like incredibly human. Like the dread I felt when she like drones, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't eat, I don't sleep. It made me think of her as like an amorphous form that would stop at nothing to bring me like pain and misery. It's like genuinely fucking terrifying. This is like I haven't like been that scared of something in a long time, and that's never happened to me with music before.
And can I make a comment?
Mm, mm.
And it's really cool how that line can be read in two ways. Like you said, it can be read as that like amorphous, horrifying, this like vengeful creature that is just gonna destroy you, and that's all it occupies its mind with. But it can also be read on like more of like a realistic human level of like dealing with
Yeah,
trauma and depression. Like, I can't eat, I can't sleep. I
yeah.
love how different ways she says it throughout the track with different contexts, really like frames it in like those contrasting ways. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, 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 no worries. And like something this track does so well, like the rest of the album, is it takes because this is an incredibly almost a grand. This is an incredibly grand and sort of like traditionally artistic. It like it's classical essentially piece. And it has this amazing like writing that feels like it lives up to the musical standards. Like the things she says sound so grand. Like every stone on every mountain is etched with my name. That's like impressive and astounding. But she also has these like really human moments of aggression and also fragility. But things like I'm the cunt killer is so like so contrasting to things like my name is etched on every mountain. It's so much more like humanly aggressive, that it kind of takes these like really grand ideas, of still of pain and horror, but like makes them a bit more human, but without
Yeah.
kind of taking away the fear that you feel from them.
Mhm. And I
Um,
think it's really beautiful that it takes like the language of the abuser and just like spits it back at them, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so powerful, and it's kind of the same to like in terms of spitting back their language at them, like things like "How do I break you before you break me?" Like it's she just gets lost in this kind of complete like back and forth of like just kind of finding any means of escape and power. It really feels like at this point, like she's kind of yet to escape, and like she's wrestling with like feel it like wrestling with feeling like she's had her power ripped from her, um and it's that kind of inferior posturing going on with things like my name is etched on every mountain, whereas in reality she's just locked into this like petty struggle of how do I break you before you break me. So I just think it's an incredibly like layered and nuanced track, and there's just so much you can unpick from it. It's amazing, and such an important like piece for establishing how you're going to feel throughout the album. Um, like I also really love "Fragrant Is My Many Flowered Crown." I was just seeing this kind of thing before you actually like got into listening to the album. It obviously stands out as like kind of a more pleasant track name as opposed to things like "Fucking Death Dealer." So I was just super.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Like how amazing is that? There can be a song called "Fucking Death Dealer" and it's not just like it lives up to that. Anyway, um, and yeah, it really works. It as just serving as kind of not a reprieve because there's still all that pain there, but it does exactly what it's supposed to do. In kind of taking because the first half of this album has this very aggressive like track listing kind of thing, whereas in the second half it moves to more like uh songs of pain and in like day of tears and mourning, sorrow, 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 and things like that. Um, so it kind of yeah, it's definitely a shifting moment in the album for me. Um, and I'll go for the closer as well. I thought this was immense. I would say I'm just going to look up the lyrics now, so I don't. It while it still retains that very aggressive naming of like I am the beast. The most of the a lot of the song is reduced down to this refrain of all I want is boundless love, all I know is violence. And it's really kind of tragic because as the album comes to an end, you almost feel like she can't escape, even if she has escaped that exact abusive relationship that that this album is about. Um, it creates this sense that like she craves boundless love, but she having been trapped in violence for so long. It's kind of all that manifests around her. Like it's just positive feedback at this point. There's kind of no way of clawing her life back. And that's kind of reflected in like Beast he named me, Beast I am. Like no matter how she might physically be escaped from that situation, like he has made her the Beast, which is so like tragic. As powerful as this album is, like you said, it really goes to show just the complexity of kind of humans and how they can be changed and forced into like situations that they can never escape from because they become, not that she becomes an abuser, but she becomes unable to manifest like anything positive in her life. And so she just ends the album with "Praise me, beast I am, praise me." She can't escape like that idea of escape. There's only one form of escape, and it's like being like de- uh, de- de- deified. That's it. Because if she's unable to find genuine happiness, she can only be happy through her power, which is so dark. But like it feels perfectly fitting as an ending for this album. And again, it's kind of like very reminiscent of Midsummer. Spoilers for Midsummer. But in terms of how, instead of um, completely like letting go of like all the pain of her boyfriend and all the everything that came with that, she instead like subverts him and like places herself into a threshold of power and finds like a joy in that, which is incredibly dark. So yeah, those are my three favorite tracks. Least favorite, I'll actually agree. I kind of found Sorry 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 kind of like meandering and just a little bit like, I don't know. I like the like the sheer sound of it. I think it like sounds interesting, but it does just go on a bit long and doesn't really go anywhere that all that interesting for me. So yeah, I mean nothing like bad. I still don't know how I'm gonna reckon with this album in terms of like where I'm gonna, because like where this is. I know like it's not all just about top tens, but like in terms of like, do I love this? Like I know I love this, but how do I feel about it? It's so difficult. Um, so yeah.
To get onto my recommend, I guess, well, I'll start. I'm going to give this the strongest of recommends, and I guess I'll start with listing out. Some people have been calling this, labeling it under the genre of neoclassical dark wave death industrial. And I'm the kind of guy where that just sounds awesome, and everything about this appeals to me. Uh, I like Midsummer. I like Midsummer as much as the next guy. But I'll be honest, it left me feeling a bit. It left me feeling a bit dissatisfied. It was more fun to conceptualize and theorize about after the film was done, but I didn't really feel a lot of the pain that I feel like I was meant to feel in that film. The opening scene is amazing, which is my favorite scene in the film. But the last hour, it kind of goes into like this druggy meandering over long thing, which is artistically pretty, but I didn't feel that, that emotional punch I wanted to feel that I got from a film like Hereditary. And this album, for me, like it really brought that to me. And I adore it for that. And I'm gonna give it a really strong recommend. I think everyone should check this out, even if this isn't the type of music you normally listen to. And this is quite brave, daring music for anyone's standards, in my opinion. It's like Swans, except with like emotional commitment. Like you actually care about what the horror that you're listening to. It's not just like edgy for edginess sake. Like, and that's what makes this album so challenging. It's just how emotional it is. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a super strong recommend. I think everyone should check this out. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I recommend this to everyone. Like, I don't go out of my way to listen to this type of thing. So I'm not exactly. I've never heard a Swans album, anything like that. So I very much came at this from like a very, yeah, pretty. Like I guess I like Shoo Shoo quite a lot. But anyway, um,
Yeah, emotionally, it does remind me of Shushu a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and kind of, oh, I hadn't thought about it till now. Anyway, kind of aesthetically. Um, like, what was I saying? But yeah, I just came to this album very much looking for an emotional experience, and that is exactly what was kind of provided. You are not really the same after hearing this. Like, my day was noticeably different after hearing this album. It's shocking and unsettling, and destroying. There are a million different ways to feel about it, and all of them are wonderfully interesting in their own way. Like, I really don't hesitate to listen to this album. It's the point I'm trying to get across as someone who doesn't listen to a whole lot of this sort of thing. Um, it's incredible, and you won't hear anything like this all year. I mean, if you do, I'm very happy for you. You're clearly sitting on a music treasure trove. So yeah, I give this like a huge recommend. Like, I think if you're gonna if you're gonna listen to anything this year, listen to this. I would say. Wow, that's pretty. Yeah, that's pretty. I actually, yeah, I'll stand by that. If you're gonna hear one album this year, just listen to this.
Awesome. Well, okay. Moving on to a lighter album, a more fun album, hopefully. Placebo is Placebo. Before we get into discussion, little coffee break. Might get some water. Do you need to go to the toilet?
Uh, no, I'll just check my phone.
Okay. All right. So now we're gonna move on to our Placebo discussion. So this is an older release album, Placebo, self-titled album. It was released in 1996. It's an alternative rock album, and yeah, it sounds like a lot of alternative rock coming out in the 90s. I want to start off with my history of this album. So Mattie and one of Mattie's friends kept recommending me this band during sixth form, I believe, like during year 12.
Yeah, this is
And
huge for us in year 12.
I tried it out, and oh my god, I hated Brian Molko's vocals with a passion. Once I did drama at A level. I once someone was just playing Placebo on the speakers like while we were rehearsing. Uh, I just it ruined my hour. You know, I really hated Brian Molko's vocals, and
I thought you were just done. You just left it there.
and recently I the album came back to my attention. And I thought, this would be an interesting album to discuss because it was one you really wanted me to listen to. And lots of people, they hear a recommendation, they just forget about it. They just let it go. But not me. I'm gonna force you to talk about it for 15 minutes and record you. Before we get into what I thought about this album, having listened to it, obviously you have your history of this band. Would you like to go into that?
So yeah, my history of this band actually begins and ends with this album. And like, I don't know. So 2 years ago, um, I was 17. I'm 19 now. I was just a a person who thought they were a male, who was really in their feelings all the time, and this album was great for me. Like, I just had so, like, I don't know. This just was like, I don't know. It was very cliche. This album just had me in my feelings. Like, oh my goodness. I go back and listen to it now, and I just am so instantly reminded of how exactly I felt when I was like 16, 17, listening to this. Wow. Oh my god. Pre-tranny Mattie. Sorry if you don't like that word. Um, yeah, it's
You can
crazy.
get cancelled for that kind of language. Do you want to get cancelled, Matty?
Cancelled before we even get 10 subscribers. um, so yeah, yeah, it's basically, um, I haven't really listened to it much this year. I still kept going with it till like all through pretty much throughout 2018, really. I believe so, at least. But this is very much an album from a very specific time in my life, essentially. And like, yeah, if you like, I can just say my thoughts on the album as a 19-year-old trans woman now.
Go for it.
So it's fine. like it's a fun listen, and like I'm able to acknowledge how I how I loved it back then. Like, and I do still get some of that out of it. Like, it's quite it's a I'll describe. I would actually it's more than fine. It's quite a cathartic listen for me. Quite a nostalgic one as well. But when I kind of like strip away the nostalgia because I've just which is easy to do. I've just heard a lot of music since. I listen to a lot more music now than I did then. And yeah, that kind of fact has kind of just it sounds very unremarkable in a lot of ways. There are things I genuinely really like about it, which I'll get into. I'll just get into it right now. I really really love the production of the guitars. I think they sound great. I have a term for this that I've had since I was 17. I call it aggressively fuzzy. So they're fuzzy and they sound really like nice, like they're not really jarring. But then there's like a grungy like playing to them, which is where that like aggression comes from. So like
Yeah.
on songs like Nancy Boy, it's very aggressively played and it's quite grating, but it still has that same kind of fuzz to it where it does just sound nice.
It's very in keeping with just how big using distortion was on guitars in the 90s. Like,
Yeah,
I say the riff in Nancy Boy sounds like shoegazy, maybe with less pedals, but it's a
I would
similar
uh,
ethos behind it.
I would 100% agree. Yeah, I would say it's a huge factor. Just like it's very reflective of the focus on just the pure sound of the guitar. And like on songs like "Hang On to Your IQ," I think it sounds great. Like I really like the way how soft the guitar is on on that song. However, with the emotional attachment slightly removed from me, other than nostalgia, I have to agree the vocals kind of suck. They don't suck. Like they're not bad. Um, but at a certain point, I really, really have to ask: is he trying to sound annoying?
Oh,
Cause
how the turns have tabled. How the turn.
yeah.
I'll let
Oh,
you
how the
finish.
turntables
But I love the
come
vocals on this
home.
album now. I love the vocals now.
No, because okay, so
I
there's bands like Blink 182, right? Who when you listen to their very 90s like croning and like whining, it's very nostalgic and funny and it's not actively irritating. So there's like a fun element there. Whereas on songs like Come Home and he it just sounds bad. Like it just sounds bad, and it's the performance as well. It really doesn't help with the fact that this is a very 90s grunge album and it's kind of cringy. Like, like,
okay. Let- can I
yeah,
move
you
on
need
to
to
what I think?
introduce your thoughts. Yeah, go on.
I okay, so my story of why I came back to this album is I had my music on shuffle, and I have a thing where I obsessively make playlists, novelty playlist, or just like sleep playlist or instrumental playlist. I really love making playlists. So what I do is I
Mhm.
shuffle through everything in my library and like see what would fit into what playlist. And the song HK Farewell came on when I wasn't really paying attention, and I was like, wow, that sounds beautiful. What's that? So I went to see like what was playing, and I was like, this is Placebo, that shitty band Mike kept recommending me. What the hell? And I was like, maybe I should listen to the album again. And oh my god, this was like this summer where like I was listening to Come Home and those guitars hit at the beginning, and something just clicked in me. It just ignited this deep love and affection for this album that has never been there
I
before.
do really like the way the
I
instrumental of Come Home is
adore
great.
this album. Come Home's honestly been the soundtrack to most of my the first half of my summer. I think I listen to Come Home every day. I love the vocals now. I think I can see why they'd come off as whiny. As someone who like enjoys quite a lot of emo pop punk vocal styles, uh, I have quite high tolerance for whiny nasally vocals.
But
Uh,
like Gerard Way sounds nice.
But
Like
okay, I think Moko vocals are effective on two levels. One, I do think there is a genuine subversion of the British rock culture in the 90s at the time. This was a time of pretty much lad rock. We had like Britpop coming up,
Yeah.
bands like Oasis, Blur. It was very much like
Very masculine.
boisterous. And then you get Molko, this like strange androgynous, I almost want to say thing, because that's what he presents himself as in his music videos. It's like he's always these weird, like shape
He
shifting
yeah, he does
psychedelic
legitimate.
creatures.
Yeah, he does. Like it's definitely an attempt to like kind of dehumanize himself. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and the vocals are as mutilated. I think I like to think that they're meant to sound like very androgynous and affected, and to as a front to that kind of like masculine culture in rock. But also, I just think they sound really pained. And I think there's a real emotion that comes through in the whining of "Come Home." I like that it sounds whiny. It really sounds like somebody who's just so desperate for you to just like come back, and it's
yeah.
like they've lost all dignity. They're just like begging you to come home. So yeah, I adore this album now.
I do see what you mean. Like, because that actually is the way I felt about it 2 years ago. It's genuinely it would be genuinely emotional, but when it's the whole album, and it does sound affected, it sounds like put on. So there's kind of a level of disconnect there. So for something like Come Home, it like I think it does actually work quite well, like you said, because it's so affected, it sounds so desperate. But then as a whole album, it starts to just feel kind of disingenuous. Like I'm not doubting the emotions of this album, like I'm not a therapist, but it's more just like when I kind of feel like the point of emotional connection to a human, which is the vocals, when that's consistently feels kind of put on and like not like I'm hearing just the artist. I don't know. It 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 doesn't just sound like the tone of voice they're putting on. It sounds like forcefully emotive. And I do really struggle with that throughout the album. Like I know like
Mm.
how like he attempts to sound kind of sinister on that song with this like whiny vocals. Like that's when it crosses into cringy territory for me. Um like
I I
I
guess
don't know.
I guess I like how unabashedly adolescent this album is, kind of in a similar way how
How
it's
I felt
obviously
about
it's
it. Yeah.
well, not even similar to how you felt about Hatchie a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
where like a lot of the adolescent stylings of that album for me just came off as quite like boring and kind of amateurish. While for you they were like effective. I think that's happening here, but like I really love stuff like Teenage Angst. Oh, I love there's like simplistic lines like "Since I was born, I started to decay," which are kind of trite and melodramatic, but it's
But
also
same Billie
there's a
Eilish. Yeah.
self awareness about how it's so teenagery, and I think like the vocals as well are an embrace of this kind of adolescent angst, and it really is nostalgic to listen to. Like I didn't even really grow up with this album, but listening to it now, uh, it's really cozy, kind of takes you back to that place of like everything's super important and yeah,
Like
melodramatic. I think the
I
vocals complement that.
I totally see what you mean, and I would agree if this exact thing wasn't so saturated in the 90s. Like
Mm.
the things he's singing about and the way he's singing about them, this was the status quo, and I do kind of have I I know I said like you can kind of like you go back and like look fondly at like Blink 182. I'll be honest with you, I kind of fucking hate Blink 182, like for like even their 90s stuff. I really like I find it incredibly like affected, forced, and overly nostalgic. Like it just sounds so forcefully nostalgic to me. Uh I think I genuinely have a bias against this stuff that really feels like like I do totally understand the Hatchie comparison because we are enjoying it in very similar ways. Um, but with Hatchie, like that kind of thing is like a one-off, like now. But like I said, this was the status quo in the 90s. Like there was so much of this that it can't help but feel like less special. If this was like the Hatchie of 96, and it was just like this one cute throwback kind of nostalgic album, I would totally agree. Like I do kind of like see that. But this was just how everyone sung. It just also kind
Mm,
of he just also puts on an annoying tone.
yeah. Well, agree to disagree. I mean, as you know me very well, and this type of music is like right down my
Yeah,
wheelhouse.
yeah, 100%.
I'm like completely fine with this, and I love dumb schmaltzy teen stuff. Like I stand by High School Musical 2 being a good film, and I have no shame about that. Anyway, I'm gonna move on to favorite and least favorite tracks,
Mm.
and kind of say how they inform how I feel about the album. So, "Come Home" is one of my favorite tracks, and I've talked about that at length. My one of my other favorite tracks is Nancy Boy, which I mentioned before. It's probably one of the best written songs on the album, and really taps into that kind of subversion of like British rock culture. I also this album's lyrics are quite weak in my opinion, but Nancy Boy is like one of the lyrical highlights of the album. My favorite line from Nancy Boy is she's universal, spinning me round, she's coming over me. And that's my one of my favorite kind of like wordplay moments of like messing with how we think of gender and sexuality, and like you can't just label this track as, oh, it's a gay anthem or it's a straight anthem. It's deliberately completely, yeah, universal. Like it uh mutates any conventional binary idea you have of sexuality or
Mm.
binary, and that's like really impressive lyrically. Lots of this album's lyrics are quite weak and teeny, and even though I think it's cute sometimes, other times it's just really boring. Like hang on to your IQ, Bruce Pristine. Like the lyrics kind of suck, you know. But whatever. Anyway, my last favorite track is HK Farewell, which is actually a hidden track. And it's gorgeous. And I think I consider it like the actual closer to the album. And there's a sonic maturity in this track as well as the song Swallow and Lady of the Flowers, which while I accept your criticism that this is quite like, by the numbers for an alt rock 90s album, these last three tracks really are more ambitious and impressive. Like they kind of move into almost like post rock musicianship happening with the use of like spoken word in that muffled voice. It reminded me of something out of like Silent Hill 2,
Mm.
having like creepy spoken word over melodic guitars. If you've ever played Silent Hill 2, you know what I'm talking about. It's the intro song. It really has that vibe, and the way he repeats the "I apologize." Excuse me. I think it's really cool. It reminds me of like what Slint were doing in the early 90s. HK Farewell is like the epitome of that atmospheric post rock experimentation, which I didn't expect or demand of this album, but I'm happy that Molko and the band had the guts to like go down that route a bit. I don't want to be too overly praising of this because like there were other alt rock bands in the 90s that did weird experimental stuff, like people like Smashing Pumpkins. Even if you don't like them, you have to admit they're not generic 90s alt rock. They did experiment. But still, I thought it was really impressive and cool. And I think I give this a strong recommend on the basis of it just being a very, in my opinion, solid 90s alt rock album. And I think it's admirable that it's both extremely fun, like Teenage Angst is one of the best examples of a 90s alt rock song, in my opinion. But it at the same time, it isn't afraid of like taking risk and musical detours, which normally go off pretty well. Other than my least favorite track, Bruce Pristine, which just sucks. Terrible lyrics like "We were born to lose." In this matrix, it's plain to see it's either you or me. It's embarrassing to
It has
listen to,
no
quite
point.
frankly.
It's such a
Uh,
yeah,
it's a
such a
boring,
dud.
bland track. But yeah, other than that, I strongly recommend this album, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you, Matty, for recommending it to me 3 years ago.
All right, so let's do this. I actually I quite enjoy "Hang On to Your IQ." I just really like the way the guitars sound. And that's kind of a consistent theme for this album for me. I find the instrumentals really carry this album. I've been very very harsh on the vocals. And like kind of sorry not sorry because like they don't bother me that much when I listen to it, but I do think they are that bad. But anyway, yeah. So I really like "Hang On to Your IQ." It's just very pleasant.
It's a really pretty track. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really pretty.
Bad lyrics though,
And
but
yeah, bad lyrics. Really bad. I Lady of the Flowers is I find really sweet. Like the lyrics, like they're a little bit more. They are quite like they're they're a little bit generic. But it actually does kind of sound like he's singing about something here. Like I do get a sense of like this person he's singing about. And the music fits it essentially. Like it's actually one of the times that I enjoy like the what the vocals bring to the track. And I want to shout out Swallow because something I'm just realizing is that essentially, well, this is super personal. What kind of like essentially, I remember this at the time that this album was very important to me. Like something very sad happened, and I just walked home. It sounds so cliche, like walking home sad, listening to a sad '90s rock song. But essentially, I had this song playing, and it genuinely felt like the time of my life that this album was important to me had come to a close. And this song is very different from the rest of the album, and I didn't used to listen to it very much when I would listen to the album because it is just very dark and depressing. And it was hugely important for me in that moment. So it is still important to me today. In just how in that one moment that I listened to that song, it really like conceptualized a point in my life. Like it was just like, okay, this is kind of it for this time. I'm kind of done. So yeah, it's a really important song for me. And I know I've been really down on the album, but I do like I kind of like it's like a love hate thing. Like I only hate it because I love it.
and I think with what you're saying about Swallow, like, and it being so different to the rest of the album, there's this weird maturity to it, like the anxious energy of him muttering, stop stammering." Like that is the artistic use of language and how it's delivered is pretty much unheard of on the rest of the album. So,
Yeah,
go on.
when you bring those lyrics up now, it's like really sad for me. Like I just remember being like a 17-year-old and like hating the way I talked and things like that, and like I was so anxious all the time, and just yeah, those kind of like completely deflated vocals that also felt like they were being like just so defensive as well. Were like yeah, incredibly relatable for me. Yeah, least favorite track. I'm gonna go 36 Degrees because it has one of my
Oh,
hugest. It has one of my hugest pet peeves in songs, which is randomly said numbers just so they can have something that can rhyme. I
you've got to breathe to stay
fucking,
alive.
I fucking hate it. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Gotta breathe to stay alive. What the fuck does that mean?
It's actually 4723985. So,
What does that mean? Like what the fuck? It actually makes me
well,
so
he's never been
angry.
an extrovert, but he's still breathing. And did you know that the average body temperature is 37 degrees, and 36 degrees is 1 degree below average body temperature. So he's cold-blooded.
Yeah, it's one of my massive pet peeves. It's like they also do it in the Weezer song. It's in Everything Will Be Alright. It's one of those. I think it's Cleopatra. Um, where yeah, when he's just like 4, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9. Gotta breathe to stay alive. What the fuck? Like, what the fuck does that mean? What the fuck is that? It's nothing. It's fucking nothing. I hate it. Why did so many '90s songs just recite numbers and then be like, "This is fucking cool"? Like, whoa, dude. Like, what?
Yeah,
Anyway,
I completely agree with you.
I
I really
hate
enjoy
it.
the song, but yeah, lyrically it's very weak.
I hate it so much. I don't know why. And like I really like Weezer, but when they do it in that one song and everything will be alright in the end, it's low. I hate it. So those are my two favorite tracks. I guess I don't know. Um, this album was like really important to me for like a year. And like so it's very hard for me to view kind of like as what what someone like if I just listened to this now, what I would have thought of it. Um, if you're like really in your feelings right now, if you kind of like really want some like nostalgia, some very like indulgently emotional vocals, this will work quite well for you. And that's not to like say that your emotions are like stupid and like, childish. Not at all.
That's
We all
exactly what Mattie's saying.
I hate you. Not at all. Like we all have those times in our lives where we just need some kind of like simplistic feelings, because like at least like being simply sad is nicer than being like complexly like all over the place sometimes. So yeah. But if you're just looking for like a decent like rock album, God, there's so many things you can like invest your time in better. Like when I view this as just like as like just a good '90s rock album, like oh my god, just go listen to like Pinkerton. You'll be fine. I mean, they're very different, but like it's so much. Yeah, this is you could do better. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I'd also say like in terms of like someone with a similar vocal style, I think Smashing Pumpkins is probably a better example of Placebo. I know you're not as big of a fan of them now, but I am a big fan.
Yeah.
So I'd say some of like a high-pitched nasally vocal style, but probably did make better 90s alt rock. Smashing Pumpkins. But I still think this is like really great alt rock. So yeah, but anyway, happy we got to talk about it, and I'm shocked that like we ended up disagreeing so aggressively on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't. I was worried. About. Well, yeah. I thought I was curious why you picked it again, and now I know.
Okay, so that's it. That's it. I think we've ticked all the boxes. So looking on
Hmm.
to our next podcast, what movies do you have in store?
Okay. Well, Josh, you will be happy to know
Geordie
that.
Explorer.
Fuck off. No. Sorry. So I have picked my new movie, and that new movie is going to be It Chapter 2. I know we've agreed to see that together. Actually,
Tonight
today,
even.
on the day of recording. But I
True.
have wanted to talk about this like ever since we started the podcast. Me and Josh saw It Chapter 1 together in 2017. And just like really enjoyed just like the fun childish thrills of it basically.
Fun fact: I watched that film 2.5 times in cinema.
Oh yeah, the half being when someone he was with had to leave. That why did that film fuck so many people up? What was going on in 2017 that everyone
I
was
don't
so
know. There was like murderous clowns walking around. I think that was the touchy clown stuff.
yeah, yeah, I guess. Um and the older film we're going to be discussing, I have been for a while holding off from talking about like significant movies, and that's still what I'm gonna do. But I'm thinking next time. I'm thinking next time we'll talk about something big. Uh, so the film. I mean, this was still a pretty big deal. But we're gonna talk about It Follows from 2014.
Two
Uh,
It films.
yeah, exactly. I was just like, let's do it as a theme, but also they're so ridiculously different. And I just thought it'd be a fun, cool another horror episode. Oh my god.
Well, it makes sense. They're both like nostalgic 80s horror movies.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
It's a fitting theme.
Yeah, boom. So there we go.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited to watch It Follows again.
Yeah, man.
I hope I like it as much as the first time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're just gonna have to see. But yeah. So that's about everything. So the next films we're talking about are It Chapter 2 and It Follows.
Awesome. Well, thank you for tuning in this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, like I said, like if you have anything to add to that ContraPoints discussion, feel free to like comment or message the Instagram page. We'd love to like bring it up in the next video. But if not, we'll just leave it. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely day. And
Yeah.
watch these films. Keep up.
Listen
Any,
to Caligula, motherfuckers.
any last? I am the fucking death dealer. Can we end on that note?
Yeah. Let's do it.